In the annals of organized crime, few figures loom as large as Tony Accardo, often dubbed Big Tuna, in homage to his love for fishing. Accardo's roots in the Mafia stretch back to the Roaring Twenties, where he cut his teeth as a made member of Al Capone's notorious outfit. Legend has it that he boasted of being one of the triggermen in the infamous St. Valentine's Day massacre of 1929. As the winds of power shifted, Accardo welcomed Charlie Luciano and other Mafia luminaries to Chicago, where they convened to determine the future of democratic politics, ultimately aligning with FDR's camp. Accardo's tenure with the Chicago outfit spanned over 6 decades, during which he wielded considerable influence for at least half a century. In the labyrinthine world of organized crime, Accardo's strategic acumen set him apart. Sensing the impending storm of intensified law enforcement scrutiny in 1957, he astutely retired from active operations. However, his retirement was not absolute. He appointed a successor, Giancana, and assumed the role of consigliere at Paul Ricca's behest. Accardo's influence extended far beyond the streets of Chicago. He played a pivotal role in the expansion of the mob's interests, particularly in Las Vegas, Texas, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, and beyond. However, maintaining control over these ventures was fraught with peril. Accardo dealt ruthlessly with those who crossed him, whether it was Bugsy Siegel, Gus Greenbaum, or Spilotro, whose demise came swiftly and brutally at the hands of Accardo's preferred weapon, the baseball bat. Accardo's mastery extended beyond the realms of crime. He was a consummate host and chef, regaling friends and family with tales of his fishing exploits and culinary skills. His loyalty to the outfit was unwavering, and his strategic foresight unparalleled. Despite the tides of change and the encroaching spectre of law enforcement, Accardo remained untouchable, spending a mere fraction of time behind bars. The zenith of Accardo's influence came to light in Time magazine's 1977 exposé, which identified him as the representative of the Chicago outfit on the Mafia Commission, alongside other formidable figures. The scale of the mob's empire was staggering, with annual revenues rivaling those of major corporations. Accardo's legacy endures as a testament to his unparalleled ability to navigate the treacherous waters of organized crime. From the bustling streets of Chicago to the neon-lit corridors of Las Vegas, his imprint is indelible. Though the era of the untouchable mob boss eventually waned with the advent of RICO prosecutions, Accardo and his ilk remained towering figures, evading the long arm of the law and dying as rich, free men. In the annals of American history, Tony Accardo stands not only as a symbol of organized crime's shadowy machinations, but also as a testament to the enduring allure of power, influence, and the pursuit of the American dream, albeit through darker avenues. Joe Batters went to great lengths to shield his wife and family from the realities of his criminal activities on the streets. He maintained close ties with the family members of his crime syndicate, even fostering amicable relationships with the daughters of Sam Giancana, who respected and admired Accardo's protective nature. In 1957, amidst escalating tensions and rising violence in New York and beyond, Accardo contemplated retirement. His associate Charlie had already retired in Italy, seeking respite from the escalating conflicts. Meanwhile, New York's underworld witnessed a series of violent upheavals, including the killings of Scalise and the disappearance of the Mangano brothers. The year also marked the demise of Anastasia, a figure known to Accardo. With Costello expressing his desire to retire, Accardo's wife suggested he consider a similar path. However, unlike Costello, whose allegiance lay with Luciano and communicated through a surrogate, Red Levine, Joe Adonis, Pat Eboli, Mike Miranda, Meyer Lansky, and others, Accardo operated within the Chicago outfit under the leadership of Ricca. Ricca, a formidable figure, held sway over the organization after the passing of Capone and Guzik. Accardo needed his approval for retirement. Accardo's proposal to retire was met with reluctance by Ricca, who believed in the Chicago tradition of foot-first retirement. Undeterred, Accardo presented a compelling solution. He had groomed a successor, a man proven in countless conflicts, to lead Chicago's underworld into. This man was Giancana, a formidable figure with whom Accardo had ventured into many policy rackets. In 1962, Accardo hosted a grand wedding for his daughter, drawing the elite of organized crime, including Carlo Gambino, Russell Bufalino, and Carlos Marcello Trafficante, Tommy L., and a whole lot more, showcasing his standing within the syndicate. Despite Giancana's ascent, Accardo remained vigilant, seeking another successor in the mid-60s, while Ricca continued to wield influence behind closed doors as Louisiana's Chicago point of contact. Following Capone's era, Ricca and Accardo spearheaded the syndicate's expansion into gambling in the 40s, reshaping its fortunes. Their strategic investments avoided Louisiana during the 30s, but their vision and partnership propelled the organization to new heights in subsequent decades. In the turbulent landscape of the 1960s, organized crime entered a new phase marked by internal strife and external pressures. For Accardo, his planned retirement seemed perfectly timed, offering him the opportunity to step back from the limelight and discreetly manage his affairs behind closed doors. With 3 years of meticulous preparation, Accardo had positioned himself for a seamless transition. However, fate had other plans, and it would be Giancana who bore the brunt of the storm. Within 5 years of Accardo's retirement announcement, Giancana found himself targeted, ultimately imprisoned on a technicality. Despite his incarceration, Giancana's influence lingered, casting a long shadow over the Chicago outfit. In May 1965, an article emerged shedding light on the history and current state of the Chicago outfit, offering insights into its inner workings and the challenges it faced. The article served as a testament to the evolving dynamics within organized crime, illustrating the intricate interplay of power, ambition, and betrayal. As Giancana languished behind bars, the Chicago outfit navigated uncertain terrain, grappling with shifting alliances and external pressures. The article captured the essence of a tumultuous era, where the old guard clashed with emerging forces and the lines between friend and foe blurred. Amidst the chaos, Accardo's calculated withdrawal from the forefront of the organization stood as a testament to his foresight and strategic acumen. His legacy, intertwined with the storied history of the Chicago outfit, remained a focal point amidst the ever-changing landscape of organized crime. As the year unfolded, the echoes of Giancana's imprisonment reverberated throughout the syndicate, reshaping its dynamics and laying the groundwork for future conflicts and power struggles. In the corridors of power and the shadowy underworld, the legacy of the Chicago outfit endured, a testament to its resilience and adaptability in the face of adversity. Death row in Chicago's Cook County Jail consists of 3 cells in the basement, with cell number 3 only 20 feet from the electric chair. During June and part of July 1965, cell number 2 had an extremely unusual tenant, a short, bald, gargoyle-faced, beak-nosed man wearing an expensive grey silk business suit instead of the usual prison garb. In his dark 8 by 10-foot cell, flanked by 2 convicted murderers, he alternately raged at his guards in terrible outbursts of temper and lay on his bunk repeating, as if to reassure himself, "I won't talk." Because he was not a convicted murderer awaiting execution, but a federal prisoner temporarily being held in maximum security, he could not mingle with other prisoners or even make use of the prison laundry. He had to wash out his imported silk shorts and socks by hand in the wash basin of his cell. In July, the authorities decided they could ease up a bit on security and moved him from death row to a cell in the federal tier of the jail. He has been there ever since. By the end of this month, when he is due for release, he will have spent almost a year in jail. The astonishing thing about this prisoner's case, however, is not the duration of his confinement, but the fact that he is behind bars at all, For the inmate is Momo Salvatore, Sam, Giancana, boss of bosses of the Cosa Nostra in Chicago, and a member of the 12-man High Commission of the Mafia in America. Although he rules a $2 billion a year crime empire, dealing in such commodities as murder, narcotics, prostitution, usury, and extortion, the law was not able to lock him up since he did time for armed burglary in 1943, when he was just a junior hood with ambitions. The jailing of Giancana for contempt of court followed a dramatic change in strategy by the Department of Justice in its war on organized crime. Early last year, the federal government quietly launched a major attack on the Cosa Nostra's Chicago branch, the most powerful and monolithic mafia family in the United States, and its victories there have already helped shape its strategy against the mafia elsewhere. What makes these victories especially significant is that they have been won against top leaders of the mob rather than mere underlings. Not only has the boss of bosses himself gone to jail, one of his principal lieutenants, under-bosses in the Cosa Nostra, has been sentenced to 4.5 years in prison, and another is now awaiting sentence, perhaps for as long as 20 years. This series of defeats for the mafia leadership of a single city, within little more than a year, is probably unprecedented. Until recently, the men who run the Cosa Nostra in the United States have been able to break the law with almost certain impunity. There are 3 main reasons why they have seldom gone to jail for their crimes. First is the layer upon layer insulation with which the mafia leaders protect themselves. The normal family structure is so skillfully stratified that, for example, when a Cosa Nostra boss orders a murder, the actual triggermen may be 5 layers below him in the structure. Trying to trace a Cosa Nostra crime to the man who ordered it is like trying to fight your way through a maze, says a Justice Department official. Then, when we are beginning to get somewhere, there is a sudden, unexplained gangland murder, as the newspapers call it. We can deduce that he was a link in the chain who was destroyed to remove a possible witness we hadn't even reached in our investigation. A second major safeguard for the Cosa Nostra chieftains is sheer terrorism. Witnesses against mafiosi have a bad habit of disappearing, dying, or losing the spirit of cooperation. During the McClellan Committee hearings in 1958, for example, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, then counsel for the committee, questioned New York boss Thomas, Three Finger Brown, Lucchese, about his arrest for the murder of a man named Louis Cerasulo in New York in 1928. According to the information that we have, said Kennedy, the wife and daughter of the murdered man identified Mr. Lucchese and his brother-in-law as the ones who committed the murder, and when they were finally brought into trial or brought into court, they, the wife and daughter, refused to affirm the identification. Now, that is the situation that existed, and I want to find out what Mr. Lucchese knows about it, said Lucchese. I decline to answer under the Fifth Amendment. The protection of constitutional guarantees, such as the Fifth Amendment, is the third major reason that mafia leaders have been able to stay out of prison. Spending millions of dollars in legal fees, the mafiosi have used and misused every safeguard written into the law to protect the civil liberties of ordinary citizens. The government's big offensive against these seemingly impregnable defenses has been a long time in preparation. Until 1957, when New York State Police surprised the Cosa Nostra leaders at their Grand Council meeting at Appalachian, few law enforcement authorities even believed that there was such a thing as a national mafia crime syndicate in the United States. When its existence was finally proved, however, the government started action on 2 fronts. The FBI and other government agencies began the long, hard task of infiltrating the Cosa Nostra with undercover agents, much as they had done with the Communist Party in the 40s. At the same time, the McClellan Committee began holding the series of now celebrated hearings, which have not only exposed the workings of the mafia conspiracy to the public, but also helped develop new legislation to fight that conspiracy. In 1961 and 1962, a number of such new laws were passed, with President John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, then Attorney General, vigorously pushing their passage through Congress. Typical of the new legislation was a section of the criminal code titled Interstate and Foreign Travel or Transportation in Aid of Racketeering Enterprises. Known to law enforcement people as ITAR, this section sets stiff fines and prison sentences for anyone who travels in or uses any facility in interstate or foreign commerce in connection with certain crimes, among them murder and extortion. These laws gave the Justice Department powerful new weapons for its assault on the Mafia bastion of Chicago. Because it opens up new areas to FBI investigation, for example, ITAR was instrumental in convicting Giancana's vice president, in charge of muscle, Milwaukee Phil Aldericio, in April 1965. It was his first conviction in 30 years, despite 20 arrests. According to testimony at the trial, the 51-year-old enforcer's professional services were retained by Ruby Kolod, part owner of the gambling casino in the Desert Inn in Las Vegas, and by Kolod's sidekick, William Icepick Willie Alderman. The two had been unhappy about their business relationship with a Denver lawyer and high-stakes crapshooter named Robert Sunshine. Kolod and Alderman had given Sunshine $68,000, allegedly skimmed off the top, from the cashier's cage at the Desert Inn that was unrecorded for tax purposes, for him to invest in an oil lease promotion venture. Their thought was that this illegal money would bring them profits, which they could report on their tax returns at little cost to themselves, thanks to the substantial deductions the government allows oilmen. Instead, Sunshine's venture had lost money, including Kolod's and Alderman's. At this point, Aldericio and an assistant called on Sunshine at his office. "Ruby sent us. We came to kill you," Aldericio announced without ceremony. Sunshine testified at the trial that he pleaded for his life and talked Aldericio into examining his books as proof that he had indeed lost the $68,000 in his oil speculation. After about an hour, Aldericio agreed to call Kolod, who was then relaxing at a Catskill Mountain Resort Hotel in Monticello, New York, to suggest that he rescind the execution order. The phone call was made then and there, from Sunshine's office. Kolod relented on the phone and told Aldericio to allow Sunshine to live, provided he immediately started paying back the $68,000 in $2,000 monthly installments. Sunshine then got on the phone and thanked Kolod for sparing his life. Kolod said, "Okay, but keep up the payments or it might be necessary to have Phil come back." Basically, it was that phone call, and others which followed, that convicted Aldericio, Kolod, and Alderman. When agents confronted Sunshine with the details, they had learned about his business relationship with Kolod and Alderman. The lawyer, now disbarred and serving a prison term for embezzlement in another case, agreed to testify as the government's chief witness. Found guilty of attempted extortion, Aldericio, Kolod, and Alderman are appealing sentences of 4.5, 4, and 3 years, respectively. Perhaps even more menacing to the Mafia than the new laws is the organized crime section, which Robert Kennedy created within the Department of Justice when he was Attorney General, to mastermind the war against the Cosa Nostra. This elite group now consists of about 50 lawyers. 6 of the 50 are concentrated in Chicago, under the leadership of 36-year-old David Shippers, a former candidate for the Catholic priesthood with the build of a pro-football linebacker. Shippers and his men planned from the start to go directly after the mob leaders, and their unorthodox tactics have brought them some notable victories. For example, they were mainly responsible for the indictment of underboss Rocco Prano that led to his conviction for extortion in March of this year, and a possible 20-year sentence for embezzlement in another case. Agreed to testify as the government's chief witness. Found guilty of attempted extortion, Aldericio, Kolod, and Alderman are appealing sentences of 4.5, 4, and 3 years, respectively. Perhaps even more menacing to the Mafia than the new laws is the organized crime section, which Robert Kennedy created within the Department of Justice when he was Attorney General, to mastermind the war against the Cosa Nostra. This elite group now consists of about 50 lawyers. 6 of the 50 are concentrated in Chicago under the leadership of 36-year-old David P. Shippers, a former candidate for the Catholic priesthood with the build of a pro-football linebacker. Shippers and his men planned from the start to go directly after the mob leaders, and their unorthodox tactics have brought them some notable victories. For example, they were mainly responsible for the indictment of underboss Rocco Prano that led to his conviction for extortion in March of this year and a possible 20-year sentence. Prano had run the towns of North Lake and Stone Park. Just west of Chicago, like a feudal duchy, according to Shippers. A dark, handsome man of 45, he had a police record studded with arrests and 2 convictions for burglary. Just last June, he added to it a 4-month jail sentence, still on appeal for beating up a 23-year-old mother who lived in a Stone Park motel, of which he is part owner. Mrs. Laura Ann Zernick testified that Prano came to her apartment to complain that she was making excessive use of the motel's laundry room. When he refused to leave, she said, she went to a phone booth down the hall, but he followed, pulled her from the booth, yanked her hair and slapped her face. Prano's basic job in North Lake and Stone Park has been to oversee all vice and gambling in these towns on behalf of the Mafia, but he also managed to stake out a considerable personal empire, owning bars, motels, taxi companies, theatrical booking agencies, sewer companies and construction firms. The full extent of his economic hold on the towns, however, came to light only with his indictment for conspiracy last August. Indicted along with him were North Lake's mayor, Henry, the little guy, Neri, Wayne A. Seidler, a former alderman of North Lake, and Pete Anderson, the town's building commissioner until 1963. Their plot, the indictments alleged, was a simple one. In recent years, several large corporations, attracted by North Lake's flat terrain, many railroad lines, and proximity to Chicago's O'Hare Airport, have begun construction of factories and warehouses there. As soon as the work was well in progress, however, according to the indictments, Prano and his henchmen among the North Lake town officials would conspire to halt completion of the plants by withholding further building permits until the contractors paid them off. In amounts ranging from $2,500 to $3,500. Legally, this came under the heading of economic extortion. It was also an ITAR violation, since Prano made some of his threats by long-distance phone calls to the home offices of the companies. Seidler and Anderson were convicted along with Prano in March and faced the same sentence of up to 20 years. Mayor Neri was acquitted. With Aldericio and Prano already convicted and fighting to stay out of prison, morale in the Chicago Mafia is at an all-time low. Conversely, the government feels that each new conviction is bringing it closer to the day when it can put Giancana himself away for a long, long time. The 57-year-old boss of Chicago's Cosa Nostra is a tough, profane, wild-tempered, ruthless gangster who lives in a lavish, yellow brick fortress home in Oak Park, a suburb of Chicago. He rose to his present position of absolute power over the $2 billion a year Mafia empire in Illinois and surrounding territory from humble beginnings as a wheelman, chauffeur bodyguard, in the pre-Capone 42 gang in the 20s. In his youth, he was arrested 3 times on suspicion of murder and served prison terms for burglary and for moonshining whiskey. In 1943, he was rejected by the U.S. Army, which noted in a triumph of understatement that he had an inadequate personality and strong anti-social trends. Giancana rose rapidly in the mob, winning a vice presidency in the Mafia under boss Tony Accardo. When Accardo decided to retire in 1957, he named Giancana as his successor. Since then, he has been the undisputed czar of all gambling, vice, extortion, labor racketeering, and loan sharking in Chicago and vicinity. Not a bookie or pimp can operate in the area without getting a license. From one of Giancana's men for a standard fee of 50% of the take. Tavern, restaurant and nightclub owners are persuaded to accept supplies and services from business enterprises owned or controlled by Giancana, on the threat of beatings, bombings, or labor trouble from Giancana-controlled unions. In recent years, boss Giancana has found the leisure to pursue several hobbies befitting a business executive of his prominence and taste. One of these is consorting with show business celebrities. Another is golf. The boss learned a long time ago that one of the best ways to evade FBI eavesdroppers is to walk around the empty spaces of a golf course. So Giancana played nearly every day at the Fresh Meadow Golf Club with various mob lieutenants. Giancana wore yellow caps, red shirts, and drove a baby blue golfing cart. One of his aides, Butch Blassie, accompanied him in another motorized cart, which kept zooming off to the clubhouse to relay phone messages to and from Giancana, presumably concerning the pressing mob business of the day. A few years ago, Giancana found that, even on the links, he was surrounded by FBI agents. He went to court, complaining of this harassment, and won an injunction lifted shortly thereafter, which ordered the G-men to stay at least one hole's length away from him. Despite this, the federal agents knew so much about Giancana's activities that when a federal grand jury was convened in Chicago to hear charges against Rocco Prano and others, they had a long list of subjects about which they wanted to question Giancana as well. They knew, for example, that while Prano was pursuing his extortion schemes against the building contractors in Northlake, he conferred constantly with Giancana, and then would make interstate phone calls both from his own headquarters, Roberts's Lounge, and from the bar where Giancana conducted most of his business, the Armory Lounge in Forest Park, Illinois. Last spring, the Chicago office of the FBI accordingly proposed a bold new strategy to the shippers team and to the U.S. Attorney Edward Hanrahan. This was to grant Giancana immunity from prosecution when he testified before the grand jury. Immunity is an old and accepted consent in American law. Its usual purpose is to induce a lesser criminal to talk in order to bag a more important evildoer. It is used frequently in narcotics cases, where a small-time dope pusher, say, he is given immunity so that he will testify and thus help to convict the wholesaler who supplied him. When an individual is granted immunity, he no longer can take refuge in the Fifth Amendment, for he cannot possibly incriminate himself, in the legal sense, if he is not going to be prosecuted. What made the idea revolutionary was that Giancana was not a lesser criminal who might be induced to testify against a bigger one, but himself the biggest of them all. He has no superiors in the Chicago Mafia organization, and he is known to be a member of the Commission, the highest ruling body of the Cosa Nostra syndicate in the United States. He took Tony Accardo's seat on the commission when he succeeded. Accardo as Chicago boss in 1957, though he never got along well with some of the veteran members. New York's Joseph Joe Bananas Bonanno, particularly, regarded Giancana as a dangerously neurotic upstart who was still stealing cars when he, Bonanno, was adjudicating bloody gang wars inside the Mafia. The FBI, in fact, believes that Bonanno's attitude toward Giancana may explain the New York boss's kidnapping and disappearance in October 1964. The commission itself was formed in 1929, mainly to mediate the long and costly Castellamarese War in New York City, between the followers of Salvatore Maranzano and those of boss Joseph Masseria, most of whom came from the Sicilian province of Castellammare del Golfo. The Maranzano revolt got the nod of approval from the commission and ousted the rival leadership. But the commission then decided to remain in being as the ultimate authority for the previously loose federation of mafia families in the United States. Its known members today are Joe Colombo, Thomas Lucchese, Carlo Gambino, Thomas Eboli, and someone sitting in for the missing Joe Bonanno from the 5 New York City families, Gerardo Catena from New Jersey, Raymond Patriarca from New England, Angelo Bruno from Philadelphia, Joe Zarilli from Detroit, Steve Magadino from Buffalo, John Scalish from Cleveland, and Giancana from Chicago. We know there is a Mafia commission of 12 members who are the payroll board of directors for organized crime in America, David Scapers says. They meet in a closed room which our agents cannot penetrate. The only way lure us to get into that room is to get one of the members of the commission to talk. We are willing to give one top hoodlum free pass to get others. Sooner or later, one of those 12 men is going to crack, and when he does, that will be the beginning of the end of the entire mafia in America. Because of his unstable personality, Giancana seemed the obvious commission member to work on first. Summoned by the federal grand jury in Chicago last May, the boss arrived, dapper and unconcerned, and was brought before William Campbell, Chief Judge of the U.S. District Court in Chicago. But when Judge Campbell officially granted him immunity from any prosecution that might result from his testimony, Giancana was stunned. So were his lawyers. One of them later told Shippers, "I have to give you credit. I did not think the government had the guts to try this." Giancana refused to talk before the grand jury. Judge Campbell then ordered him held in contempt of court without bail and sentenced him to jail for the life of the grand jury through May 1966, or until he agreed to testify. Giancana's appeals all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court have been denied. After his release, he could conceivably be called by another grand jury and granted immunity again, and if he again refuses to talk, could be sent back to jail. And the FBI knows so much about his activities that if he talks but lies, he would be risking an even longer prison sentence for perjury. Another Cosa Nostra leader in that risk last summer and lost. Chicago took 3 weeks after Giancana went to jail. The grand jury subpoenaed Murray, the Camel Humphreys, one of the 5 top men in the mob. His specialty was political fixing and labor racketeering, a portfolio he had held since the Capone days. Wrongly guessing that, like Giancana, he was going to be granted immunity, Humphreys promptly disappeared, a rash act which he never would have thought of attempting in the old days. The FBI's undercover men picked up his trail as soon as he left Chicago, and the next morning, agents arrested him as he was forlornly standing in line to buy a train ticket in the railroad station at Norman, Oklahoma. He was brought back to Chicago in handcuffs, taken before the grand jury, and questioned with no grant of immunity. Humphreys testified, but falsely. On November 23, 1965, he was indicted for perjury and arrested by the FBI. 6 hours later, he died of a heart attack. The government's new attack on organized crime has unquestionably brought consternation to the enemy. In the Cosa Nostra in Chicago, says Shippers, there is panic in the streets. They do not know who we are going to hit next and with what. We can see the difference in young Cosa Nostra punks we have been interrogating about various crimes. They used to think of Sam Giancana as being bigger than the government. There was one kid particularly who would not talk. He was as tough and arrogant as they come. When Giancana was sentenced for contempt, we showed the kid the newspapers and we said, "Do you want to sit there in jail with Sam?" He turned white, as if his whole world had collapsed. The very next day he talked, and we have a nice little indictment in the works against one of his superiors in the Mafia. Such a thing was unheard of a year ago. In spite of all the high-priced legal talent at its command, the Knob has not yet been able to find an answer to the government's new strategy. Giancana reportedly has offered $100,000 to any lawyer anywhere in the world who can come up with an effective counter-strategy. The chance that they will be called to testify under a grant of immunity faces Mafia leaders with a nightmarish dilemma. Their Cosa Nostra oath forbids them to talk about the organization and its criminal activities on pain of death. If they do talk, their associates are pledged to kill them, and in fact, they would expect to be killed. If they do not talk, they could go to jail, one by one, even after being released. Moreover, they would live in continued fear that other Mafia members would suspect they actually did give information to win their freedom. And they must also think of the possibility that one of them, accustomed to luxury for the past 20 or 30 years, might crack under the rigors of prison if, becoming a Super Joe Valachi, thus far the only Mafia member to betray his oath, and bringing the entire structure down, to save himself. For its part, the Justice Department, mindful the U.S. Supreme Court's concern or the civil liberties of even the worst criminals, is ousting the immunity weapon with great caution. "It's a rifle, not a shotgun," says one high-ranking official. "You can't use it indiscriminately. If the courts get the idea, we're doing this frivolously, just to put people in jail without a trial, they could ruin us, and maybe throw out the valuable immunity provisions in federal statutes altogether. We can only use immunity, therefore, as we always have in cases where we have enough information that a certain individual has been involved in specific crimes, and in which it is vital for him to talk, in order to help us solve those crimes." All in all, the government's first major offensive against the Mafia has gone extremely well in its first year. Using orthodox methods as well as the new techniques, the Justice Department expects to get many other indictments from the federal grand juries which have been sitting in Chicago, New York, Kansas City, and elsewhere. Perhaps most dangerous to the Mafia is the new high morale of the government forces. Federal agents feel that. For the first time, they are not merely reacting to the depredations of organized crime, but are taking the battle to the enemy, and they plan to stay on the offensive. The end.